Hey data engineers, do you ever feel like your pipelines are stuck in the Stone Age where you spend more time wrestling with CSV files than really driving insights? I'm Chris Gamble, and today we are going to be turbocharging your workflow. Imagine a tool that reads any CSV file, auto detects its schema, and then dynamically creates a staging table in your database, all with just a few lines of Python. So stick around as we break down how to automate this tedious task and transform your data engineering process. All right, everybody knows that when working with CSV files, it is easy to get bogged down with some of the manual inspection of the file, figuring out what the schema is, and then writing those repetitive create table statements. Even occasional manual tweaks can really introduce some errors and derail your workflow. So, these manual steps might seem minor, but over time they add up, leading to inconsistent tables and unexpected data issues. You never know when you're in the middle of an important project that a hiccup's going to really derail your staging process, which can cost you valuable time and create a lot of headaches. The real challenge here is that many solutions are hard-coded to fix a fixed schema, forcing you to adjust your scripts, and every time the CSV structure changes, it causes issues, right? Without dynamic automation, each new data source becomes a very manual process, undermining your efficiency and your consistency. So today, we're going to fix that. I'm going to show you a Python class that is going to handle everything. It's going to read a CSV file. It's going to infer the column names and the data types, generate a dynamic staging table and a DDL statement, and then create the table in your database. After all that, it is also going to load that data into your staging table. This solution will scale with your needs, adapt to any CSV structure, and automate what used to be a manual headache. Here is our Python statement. This Python statement I am going to load onto our Gamble Data Engineering website. So if you're interested, be sure to go out to the website and download the file as needed so that you could follow through along with us. Go ahead and pause now if you want to go ahead and do that. All right, so you see that the first two lines here, I'm really just going to walk through this statement or this file. The first two lines here are imports. We're going to import pandas just for ease of familiarity. We're going to use pandas and we're going to use SQL Alchemy. SQL Alchemy is a library that you can use to set up your connection directly to your database. In some instances, you may have databases that are in cloud data warehouses, and you may need to adjust this script in order to connect to an Azure SQL server or a AWS server, such as a Postgres RDS database. So here we're using SQL Alchemy, and we're going to pull that create engine and our text functions from that particular library. So our first piece here, our first step here is we're creating our class. So we're going to name our class Staging Table Creator because I am not that creative with names. So our first function is always going to be our init. So this is our initiation of our class. So you'll see that every one of these has self as one of the variables that are being fed into the function. Self just means that it is feeding that class into that function. So we have our CSV file, our connection string, and then our default schema is going to be set as staging, but we're going to allow people to pass a different schema in if needed. So we do that by creating the variable schema and saying equals and staging. And what that does is by default, it will use staging. Otherwise, if somebody passes a string in that, then it'll use that other string. All right, so here we've got some notes. We have our initialize with the CSV file path, database connection string, and target schema. So we see here that we are setting some of our variables, our CSV file as the CSV file, connection string as connection string, so on and so forth down through here. This last one though is important, right? So we are creating the engine. This is our connection to our database. And so what's happening here is we are extracting that connection string that gets passed into this particular class constructor and creates that engine. So it creates that connection to our database. All right, our next function is super important. We are going to be loading the CSV. So that's what we're here for. So here we're going to create a DF, just stands for data frame. So we're going to create a data frame, and PD is our pandas library. So we're going to say pd.readcsv self.csv file. Again, self is just referring back to the class that we've created here. So we're going to say, once it creates that data frame, we're going to say CSV loaded columns, and it's going to list out the columns that are in that CSV file. And we're going to return a data frame. So that function is actually physically going to return basically a table of the CSV that it read in. All right. After we're done with all this, I'm going to show you specifically an example of what that is doing. Actually, let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to start with that load CSV. So for those of you that missed some of our earlier Python videos, we have a get parameters function that we've created. And I'll show you real quick. It's just going to be real simple. Basically, it is just a function that goes through and reads a local parameters file that you saved to your computer so that you are not exposing any of your credentials or connection strings to the world if you're ever showing a video, or loading it up into a GitHub repository. You don't want to do that either. So for those of you that want to know more about that, there is a previous Python video. Go out and check it out. Okay, so here we're getting some of our parameters, our server, our username, our database, and our password. We are creating our string for where our CSV file is. In this case, I have a external drive where I save some of my data, and this is the file that I'm specifically using is our October sales data challenge that we were doing monthly challenges. Didn't get a whole lot of take on that. If you're interested in me redoing, kind of re-upping the data challenges, let me know down in the comments. I'd be happy to up them if there is enough interest. Okay, so here we've created basically this is just a string, right? That is our path to our file that we want to import. So we're using, again, the sales data October challenge. It's a CSV file. Here, this next part, this is our connection to my local SQL server, again, using these parameters from my get parameters function from my local parameter file on my computer. Again, so I don't have to expose that to the whole world. But this is just basically saying that I have a Microsoft SQL server. We're using a PyODBC connection. And again, here's our username, password, server, database, and then the driver we're using is ODBC driver 17 for SQL Server. Okay, now we are creating here a string of what we want our table name to be. I chose sales staging because that's the type of file that we have. We have a sales file. Now we're creating a constructor. So we're creating a constructor. I'm calling it stager. Again, because I'm not real creative with names. So we're calling it stager. We're creating an instance of the class. Again, this is the class constructor. So CM is the name of our class method, right? And we've imported our class methods as CM. So cm.stagingTableCreator, which again was the name of the class here, StagingTableCreator. So not anything super complex yet. We're passing in. So this is when you take a variable and use it and give it basically to a function. It's called passing in that data or that string. So we're passing in the CSV file. You see when I double click on this, then it also highlights very conveniently the variable that was created up above, our connection string. And then, again, we're using the staging schema, but we could change this to anything else. All right, so you see step 1 is load the CSV. So I am going to actually define a function called, not a function, but a variable called df. Again, just stands for data frame, that is going to actually store what returns from this load CSV function, which again, as we noticed before, was the data frame. All right, then we're going to print the data frame, and then we're going to describe the data frame. So I'm going to run this. It just takes a second. It is incredibly quick. So you see that I've run it before just to test. Okay, so here we have our, it lets us know the CSV was loaded. And just like I mentioned before, it's going to print out the columns. We have an order date, region, product category, sales amount, and our quantity. This next section here is our data frame, where we've printed the data frame in row 19 here. So this is our data frame. You see that there's a row of dots. And that's because there's a million records in that, and it gives us the first 4 or 5, and then gives us the last 5, and gives us the details for the data that's in those records. Now, so really cool, right? It shows us the kind of what it's read in. And now this last piece is the describe function. So what describe does is there's a concept in data engineering called EDA, right? It's exploratory data analysis. You do exploratory data analysis when you are investigating new data, when you're importing new files, when you're reading new files, and just to understand what's in it, understand, data validity, consistency, things like that. Make sure that there aren't some kind of strange outliers going on. So here we see that we have and these are the things that by default describe is going to give you. It's going to give you a count of the records. It's going to give you the mean value, the standard value, standard deviation, the minimum value, and then kind of the percentiles, your different medians at 25%, 50%, 75%, and then your max. So you see that it's evaluating our sales amount and our quantity fields, and you see that those are our fields up here. And we see that we have 1 million of sales amounts, 1 million of the quantities. We see that we have our mean value for the sales amount and quantity, and I'm not going to demean you by reading out each one of these, but you get the idea. It kind of gives you an idea of, do you have any crazy outliers based on your min and your max, based on your mean versus your averages, and gives you an idea of what that data is going to look like. All right, so I wanted to show you that. Now let's jump back over to these class methods. Again, we've created this class. This class is really just a group of functions that all relate to each other, right? And so we have this class, we have our init that starts off, our constructor, and then we have this load CSV that we have discussed. Now, this next piece is our infer SQL types. So this is one of the important pieces here of this function that makes it really cool. So in this specific function that we're creating today, we have created a dictionary. So again, for those of you that missed our Python video on different containers, different data containers and different data structures in Python, be sure to go back and check that out. I talk about the difference between lists and libraries and tuples and all that in that video. Check that out if you need it. But we have our dictionary here. And so we have a dictionary of different object types that are going to be inferred, and then what it translates into when it needs to create that table, what type of data type we're going to need based on, okay, if it's an object, then it's going to be a varchar 3000, right? Varchar is variable character, for those of you that don't know. An int 64 is going to be a big integer. A float 64 is going to be a float number. Bool is our Boolean, so true false type situations. And then datetime 64 is our datetime, obviously, data type. So we've just created a few different data type mappings there. This next piece is, it creates a empty columns info dictionary, and then it is going to go through and read each of the columns and their associated data types. So we have a data type for our df.col.dtype. And so again, it's going to loop through each of those columns in our df.columns. And it's going to understand, okay, this is the data type. It's going to understand based on the mapping. It's going to compare that data type to what it needs. And if it can't find it, it's going to automatically assign a variable character of 3000, again, so that we just import it as text. So that's basically what this for loop is doing. And then we're going to print that it inferred the SQL types and provide the column information. And it's going to basically return that specific string constructor that it creates. And so it's going to create just just print out, or not print out, it's going to return a string of what it found out based on those columns. All right, so generate create table script. Again, this is one of the exciting parts here. So it's going to take what it just figured out, and it is going to actually create the create table script for your staging table. And so we have a few things going on here. We're passing in the table name from what gets passed in, right? Again, we see our variable here, table name. So we need to pass in a table name. We're going to infer the SQL types. So this function actually calls this function. You won't call this infer SQL types manually. It's just all nested in together. We have our definition of our columns, which is basically going to loop through each of the column types from that infer SQL types, and as we talk through up here, and it's going to join everything together so that it's in one long string, and that's going to be our column definition. And then we have our create table, and basically it's going to take that column definition, append it to the create table statement, and then it's going to print out our create table statement. And here we return our create table statement. Now, this next piece is actually where it creates the staging table. So you see, if you followed along here, again, if you have any questions as I'm going through this, let me know down in the comments. I will respond to those questions. And you could also join us at 10 p.m. on Fridays, where we do live sessions and we talk through things that I put out during the week. As far as videos go, we talk through wherever the conversation really flows. Okay, so create the staging table. Again, we're going to generate the table script. We've talked through that. We're going to connect to our database. We created that engine earlier with our connection string, and now we're actually going to make the connection and then execute. We're going to say connection.execute, and then we're going to pass in that create table SQL statement that got created. And so basically this is just text, right? So we need to let the constructor know, we need to let this execute function know that this is text that we're passing in, and we're passing in that create table SQL statement that got created up in this other function. And then at the end, it's going to print that the table was created and give you the schema and the table name that was created. And then finally, it's going to load the data, right? So it's going to infer the different data types that are in the file. It's going to read in the file. It's going to infer the different data types that are in the file. It is going to manually construct your create table SQL statement. It is going to execute that statement, and then it is going to load the data from your CSV directly into that table that it created in your SQL server, or whatever Postgres server, or wherever you created it. Okay, so basically this is saying that if the table name is none or the data frame is none, then it's gonna let you know, hey, there's nothing there to load, right? It's gonna tell you that the table wasn't created or the CSV was not loaded. And it's just going to return false, basically returning nothing. Otherwise, it's going to take that data frame and load it to SQL. So this first field, the first thing that toSQL wants, which is a function within your pandas library, is your table name. So first you want to give it your table name. And then you're going to tell it, okay, what is the connection? What database am I connecting to? give me the connection information. And so that's your self.engine that we just created above. And then you're going to tell it what schema you want to use. You know that basically right now we're talking about staging schemas. And so by default, that staging is going to be what gets passed in here. If it exists, then it's going to append the data. And so basically it's just going to check and make sure that that table exists. And if it exists, then it's going to load that data into that table. So append it to whatever existing records that are there. And then finally, it's going to tell you that it loaded the data to the table, and it's going to return true. And then this last function is just the run function. And so the run function, you could call the run function directly, and it's going to load the CSV, generate the create table script, create the staging table, and load the data. So we're going to do this all manually a little bit, just so that I could show you step by step what happens. All right. So we looked at this part, right, where it's loading the CSV, and we see that we have, no matter what, you have to create that table creator, right? You have to run this staging table creator, which is, again, our class constructor, right? And so we're passing in the CSV file, the connection string, and our staging for our schema. The thing that we have to pass in separately into our staging table function is our table name, right? So that it knows what the name of the table is that it's going to create. And so I'm going to uncomment this last piece out before we run the whole thing. And then I'm going to take you over to the database to show you that it loaded the data. First, I'm going to show you real quick that there is no table here named, no table here yet named sales staging. And so you see, I'll refresh just for posterity, and we're going to scroll down through here, and we're looking for staging.sales staging. And sales, you see sales data pivoted, data sample, sales test, but no sales staging. So just to show you that there's nothing there yet, we're going to run this. And again, it's going to print out that data frame. It's going to print out our list of headers, basically. So in your CSV file, you've got your headers, and those are your field names. It's going to print out the create table statement that it's going to run. It's going to let you know that that staging table was created. And then again, this file has 1 million records in it. So it took about 10 seconds, but it did complete, which is pretty fast for 1 million records, right? To be running manually on a local computer. Okay, so data loaded into our staging.sales staging. We're going to come back over here to Azure Data Studio. We are going to scroll back up here to my tables. We're going to hit refresh. And then we're going to scroll back down here, and we're going to see that sales staging was created. We're going to expand our columns. It's going to spin for a second, but it'll expand. You'll see that we have our order date is coming in as varchar max because it didn't clear, it's not perfect. But the order date is going to come in as varchar max, but I'm going to show you how to translate that into a date value so that you could load it into your production table. And if you haven't seen that video, I've already done it. The link's down below where I talk about how to convert values, varchar values into date time values. Okay. We have our region, our product category, our sales amount came in as float, and our quantity came in as a big int. So real cool thing about Azure Data Studio or SSMS, if you right click on a table, you can hit select top 1000. It's going to create that SQL statement for you and run it. And so you see it's going to just give us our top 1000. And you'll see that it goes down to 1000, right? And so that's our data. You see date time as our order date. And watch this. We're going to get rid of that top 1000. We're going to cast the order date as date time. And you could actually rename it order date. You don't have to name it something else here. Okay, we're gonna run. Oop, I duplicated the comma. It happens. Commas are your best and worst friend. Okay, and you see that it converted the order date to what we normally see as the ISO standard for our date time, which is year dash month dash day, and then space, and then the time all the way down to milliseconds. So we see our order dates, we see our region, our product category, we see our sales amounts, and our quantity. And that's it. We've now created a function, a class, and a function that will take an existing CSV file, read it, infer the data types, and load it into your database. So how cool is that? Alright, so that's a wrap on our journey through automating your CSV staging process and creating a class and associated functions in Python. So by using our staging table creator class, we are not just saving time, we are building a smarter, more flexible pipeline that really adapts to whatever data comes your way. This is very similar to what something like GPT might do. So remember, a little automation goes a long way. Instead of getting bogged down with repetitive tasks, you can really focus on the fun part, which is unlocking some insights and driving value from your data. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and join us on Friday evenings at 10 p.m. Eastern. And if you have any issues with downloading the data from the website or the script from the website, or you have any thoughts or questions, be sure to let me know down in the comments. I'm really pretty good about coming back in and answering those pretty quickly. So I will talk to you next time. I look forward to seeing you on Friday night.